so pleased to see so many happy faces here in America. You know, we owe a great debt of honor to the people behind me. Although I'm the scion of a great man, I am nowhere near able to tie their shoelaces, because they've done so much to allow you and I to be here today, to speak freely, whatever is on our mind, to speak the language of our choice, great Anglo-Saxon people speaking their ancient language, and to be able to describe each other as brothers in one country. Although we are also very different, we all speak different nuances, different languages. We have many creeds, and certainly many colors amongst us. But we do not forget that we are not only children of one mother, our nation, our country, our constitutional belief, but we are also, out of all of us, there comes a uniqueness, and this uniqueness is what makes us special. We are a mosaic. We are the proverbial human mats, made of a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and we all have within us what makes us American. E pluribus unum. This is my shield and my honor, and I believe it's also yours, if you remember it from civics class, or from your grammar school people once a year saying, E pluribus unum. And if that's all the Latin you might recall, it's enough. Because that means, out of many, this multitude, we become one. How cool is that? What kind of transformative magic that came up when the founders in Philadelphia, the Constitutional Convention, they wanted to choose the language for this new nation. And they want to choose the particular type of constitution we would adhere to. But most importantly, they chose what kind of breed we shall be. Because in this new world, we were never purebreds. We were all mutts and mongrels, having inside us maybe 13 to 15% of American Indian, the native cultures and the native peoples that existed for the last 50,000 years, having good English constitutional stock, having oftentimes Presbyterian leaning, Protestant, Reform, and all the other faith that was agreeable in our land, because as the founders said, if the Mufti of Constantinople would call on and want to build a temple to his religion, we would welcome him. So be it a Muslim, be it a Hindu, be it a Jew, be it a Gentile, but mostly being a Christian, invites all of us to be part of that great mosaic that today we call our country. So if you remember that I said anything today, I just want you to remember me as this guy who talks Latin, only 3 words, E pluribus unum. And I want us to not forget that, because we are living in difficult times. As you know, every people, periodically, they need to be tested. Tested, like a stress test that you get when you need to go to the doctor. Or the stress test that life explodes upon you because you become too comfortable. We found life to be too easy in the richness of this land. We found our constitution to be forgotten, and we found our vices to become the defining characteristic of this century. We forget what it means to be an American. We forget that it's a job, it's a 24-hour job, 365 days a year, because we are unique and we represent the hope of the world. It is not an accident why we are who we are. It is a product of evolutionary fervor. It is a product of good breeding of the best DNA in the world. Because, as anyone understands medicine, this cross breeding of all the various partners of humanity produces the best according to the Darwinian competitive spirit of our DNA and of our persons. Over many generations, to come here and to be freed from the expectation that we would be in the groove forever. There is no groove in America. And I'm sure I'm not the only one to tell you that. And every time that they try to place us in a certain kind of groove to deprive us of our inalienable rights, what do? I think we do know something about that little thing that the founders did. We tend to revolt. Yes, indeed. We are not afraid to take arms against an oppressive government, against a foreign invader, against anybody who threatens our very basic freedom of ourselves and our families. Then why have we become what I see around me? Not in here, but in the outside world. Why have we become so spoiled that we are afraid to tell the truth, face the truth, and live the truth? I think, I was not called here tonight to speak to you in words that would make you feel sanguine about the future. I am by no means speaking like a Cassandra, but I will speak like the guys behind me, both Winston Churchill and FDR, that they gave you the truth, a little bit varnished with some hope and optimism, but ultimately, on every occasion, these people gave us the truth. And I must follow in that tradition, not because it is a necessity, but because it's an absolute existential need. Now things are quite sobering up, and when I speak, I'm gonna imbue you, I'm gonna give you, I'm gonna offer you, and I want to bring you up with a sense of optimism. However, unalloyed optimism is equal to failure. We cannot describe this series of setbacks that as Americans we have experienced in the last 50 years. We cannot gloss over defeats all over the world, lack of stamina in our bloody affairs, lack of perseverance, and lack of courage, be it by our armed forces, by our political class, or by ourselves. If you look around and you see the long line of defeats that we have experienced in all fronts, I just don't speak only of the battlefronts, you will have a very difficult time reconciling that with the idea that we are a great and powerful nation, that we have more weapons than anybody else, that we have more nuclear weapons than anybody else, that we have more armaments of any sort and any kind than anybody else. As they say, the proof is in the pudding. Impact. What have we done with all that might? And I would say, well, let us not judge, because that is not very effective. But let us tally up simply the battles we've lost versus the victories that we've gained in the last half a century. And you're gonna see that our finest hour was back in the time of the Second World War. And after that, it seems like we fell asleep. It's like we went into a long hibernation and we took the best muscle that we have as a nation and put it aside. And we decided that since we won that one great war, there is no need to fight anywhere else with the same vigor, with the same persistence, with the same courage. As you know, as you well know, as your parents I'm sure have told you, these glory days did not come cheap. So I want to ask you, we are modern people. We all have a wonderful cigar and a glass of medicinal tea in our hands, enjoying this evening of camaraderie, this evening of beautiful weather, and certainly this evening that every single head in the room is full of doubt, as is mine. I'm the first one to admit that I have fears, terrible, destabilizing and debilitating fears. And I can see in your eyes that you have them too, because none of us knows where we are going next. I know it's hard to fathom, but I know that you do not know. Ask myself, I do not know whether we will be free or whether we will be slaves in the next few years. We do not know. We have enemies that we have allowed them to grow far more powerful than what Hitler and the Germans, the Nazis, could ever be. Our enemies are manifold. We have done that. We have allowed that to happen. In some cases, we have even financed our enemies and give them the resources to defeat us. And yet here we are, wondering what is next. Because once you start rolling down the hill on top of your horse, as we do sometimes down in Omak, Washington, some of you have been there on the steep hill rolling down, you cannot stop. You cannot stop this pell-mell descent into the unknown until you hit the bottom. And I think we are ready to hit the bottom. But since you don't know, and as you see, I'm not wearing anything on my head, therefore I am no prophet. I have no idea any more than you. But I have the political instinct. I understand history rather well, and I know geopolitics since I was a baby. And I can tell you, the future is bleak. Dark days will follow dark days. Bleak days will follow bleak days. And unfortunately, bloody horrors will follow bloody horrors. Before we just might be able to rise up again by the skin of our teeth. This is not a prediction, this is a reality. This is not a time to fancy talk to you or to silly-sally or to try to make you feel any better. I want you to feel that you have to wake up. Sometimes that's all we need to do. When Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of England, came back to his people at the airport and he waved a piece of paper signed by Adolf Hitler, that awful house painter, and by the Prime Minister of England himself, Lord Chamberlain. And he said to the people, "We have peace in our time, don't you worry, everything will be just dandy." It took less than 3 days before Hitler was rolling into Czechoslovakia and Austria for the Anschluss, and then into Holland, Belgium and France. But yet that very night, when the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland spoke in Parliament, my grandfather, this handsome guy who stole my look behind me, he said, "Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. That piece of paper is not worth to be used in the privy." Do you know what privy means in English? It's the toilet, the WC. And that was the case. Making this kind of agreements, bringing about a sense of unearned peace, and fooling the people and lulling them into a slum is the cause of the same failure that we experience in our country today. As if we have learned nothing from that time. as if we don't know who is the enemy and who is the friend, as if we don't sense in the bottom of our hearts and in the pit of our stomach the reality of what we have to do. Uniquely, and I say that with honor, uniquely, each one of us as an individual, each one of us as a member of this republic, and each one of us as a person who chooses to declare themselves first as Americans and then as human beings, we can do something different. Cheers to all of you, because now I have to bring you some good news. I would never want my new friends to be all depressed. And this being such a day, let us celebrate our brotherhood, sisterhood, fatherhood and motherhood, because ultimately we are one big family. And those people who seek to divide us, those people who make every effort to tear the fabric of our republic, to shred our principles and our constitution, those are the real enemies. We have traitors within our house. We have a complete fifth column operating in attempting to destroy us, because as Abraham Lincoln, our 16th president, said, if ever there is a time that this great union would be destroyed, it would be destroyed from within and not from without. I believe that. I truly believe that the old dude, was correct. In all things, well, maybe except his choice of top hats. They tend to be too tall for a tall man, but those were different fashions. So I come to tell you that very much in that line of great defenders of our union, I seek to serve, I seek to support, and I seek to lead on your behalf. I am not looking for political office, I'm not running for anything, I'm not supporting anybody, I'm not here to sell you snake oil. I'm just here to tell you, as a lineman, as a frontsman, as a simple, ordinary, humble soldier of our republic, I'm open to serving in whatever capacity it becomes necessary when the time comes. The time has not yet come, but the time has come for all of us to take stock of our situation, to wake up and decide what are we to do next. All of us, we are being conditioned, we are being prepared. If you haven't noticed, we are actually being groomed to be able to accept the dissolution of our great republic. We are terribly divided by news media that is manufactured in order to create mistrust, uncertainty, fear, doubt, and hate against each other based on skin color, faith, based on economics, based on political affiliation. This division within our country has become the ordinary thing acceptable by all of us. And this is what we have to rise against. This is what we have to fight first and foremost. To be able to stand up, overlook the harpies of division and hate, and declare ourselves that we are in a loving union with our Republican brothers and sisters, with our Democrat brothers and sisters, within our independent system, with all of the independents, and with everybody else who happens to reside within our borders. Because only then we will become strong enough to avoid what is being planned against us. And I know through very many secret as well as open information sources that we are being prepped for a civil war. We are being exercised to the point of anxiety and panic so we can indulge and that's a terrible indulgence into killing each other. There is no worse virus than the virus of hate when it gets into the bloodstream of our people. It has become such a commonplace phrase that recently they even positioned a movie called Civil War, and nobody batted an eyelid. They thought, oh, okay, that's very possible. It's a scenario for what might come. Okay. And then a little later, you see the assassination of an ex-president who is running again for the job. And that became commonplace. Some newspapers, they even call it the fall or something similar. We do not understand the magnitude of these events. We do not understand that it is an organized effort at destruction of our country. And that would be the first thing we need to understand. The Democrats are nobody's enemy. They might be misguided, but they're just being led by the nose from certain Pied Pipers to be thrown into the river. Same goes for the Republicans. The first thing we have to do is to bridge the divide between the two great political parties of our country, if we want to avoid civil war. Yes, I know many of you thinking, well, I've got my guns. I've got, a whole gun armory in my home. Nobody's gonna do anything. Believe me, that's the wrong thinking. That thinking is equivalent to wanting to engage in what they have planned for you, which is mass murder, mass destruction, and certainly the dissolution of our country. That is the enemy we have to look for. I allow you to think by yourself who might have an interest to accomplish this. We are not here to make these predictions, but I'm here to tell you that without the old Latin that I explained to you earlier, e pluribus unum, we are going to become the Balkans of the Americans. We are going to become a country that neighbor kills neighbor, father kills son, son kills father, brother kills brother. And I guess we've seen that movie before in the real Civil War when Abraham Lincoln became the president in the 1860s. And have we learned anything from it? Let me give you just some numbers. 15% of all the men fighting ability population were killed. 15%. Just take that. In addition, there was another 10 to 15% of non-combatants that they died as women and children, and that's just what we call collateral damage. If you take those numbers and you just think of the ancient cemeteries for the first Civil War of America, and if you take the trouble to go and visit the Volunteer Park in Seattle, or the one up in Magnolia, or any other of the ancient particular monuments, you will recognize some of these names that might be your family names. You will recognize that some of these people, they were progenitors of yours. And then you might come into your senses and understand that when we say e pluribus unum, it is not idle words. These are not a demonstration of a foreign language. Yes, they were Latin, because the people who chose them to represent America, they were educated well in ancient Greek and ancient Latin. And they chose these because they were the words that kept the Roman Empire together for the glorious 1,000 years of its existence. Not very successfully in some respects, but in some respects it has continued to this day via the offices of the papacy, the Vatican, and whatnot. Would you ever consider that the memory of this United States one day might be a religious office? Wouldn't that be a terrible loss for the world and for every people who look at America as this shining hill city, as the beacon of hope for all the oppressed, the tired, who seek to come here for a future? I'm not going to tell you about the American dream. That thing is long gone now. If we might rebuild it someday, that would be great. but I don't see it. We have bigger fish to fry. So I wanted to invite you to just consider, if there was a civil war, whose side you would take. And I'm gonna see a show of hands, just as an exercise in futility. I want you to raise your hand and tell me, would you be red or would you be blue? Can you just please do this? The reds, raise your hand. Nobody knows. Come on, don't be shy. Keep up. That's a good show of hands. Thank you. What about the blues now? The blues have it. Show me your hands. Come on, don't be shy. Okay? Thank you. What about the independents? I'm going to see a show of hands of independents. Okay? I see that. Thank you. Wow, that was tough. Well, it was an exercise, but a bit of a sad exercise. Now I want to ask you something else. Can I see a show of hands of those people who believe in all three colors, red, white, and blue? Bring it up. Let me see. Well, now you're Americans. Thank you. So I think that's the proper color that we should decorate ourselves with. Red, white, and blue, the color of all of us, the color of the flag, and the color of E pluribus unum. Because if you want to know what was the most difficult thing in the Second World War, and why America did not enter into that fight for the first 2 years, and old Winnie, he had to fight by himself, well, and whatever he had, he gave help to the old Stalin, so he can at least have two sides fighting against Hitler, one from the east, one from the west. But he was practically alone. And in his darkest moment, in his darkest hour, he asked for unity in his country, because even within England, there was a brand of fascists, there was a brand of Quislings, there was a brand of people who didn't want to fight and they wanted to join Adolf Hitler because that was the convenient path. And we will come up to those choices again in our lifetime. In here, in this America, not very far from today. I assure you, we are going to have these difficult choices splayed over our face, not in a complicated paper to read, but in a paper that we will have to sign off as we are going to be compulsorily, summarily, and convincingly encouraged, maybe forced, maybe even worse, coerced, to sign on to this new system of a wishy-washy republic, a fake democracy, and a future into which our independence would be rescinded. That is the time that we have to stand up and ask politely, and sometimes impolitely, with the capacity to revolt and to fight, that, ladies and gentlemen, we are Americans, and we are not accustomed to have to sign off on our freedom. We are not accustomed to have to sign off on everything we hold dear, and we're certainly not going to shriek from our responsibility, not to the flag, but to what the flag represents for every single one of us. We have this incredible stench of corruption all over our society, all over our republic, and yet we accept that as the daily grind. Well, it's just like traffic. It sucks, but you can bear it. I'm here to disagree, and I'm here to tell you that this is no way for survival. This is no way, because next step is slavery for all of us. So what would you have your children do if they want to have a republic that they can actually claim to belong to? And that would give you the answer of what you must do. I have no solutions to sell you, to offer you, or even manifest. but I have a cautionary tale to tell you from long history, from thousands and thousands of years to today, that nations that went down without a fight disappeared from history. Yet, those who fought, even losing battles, they had a capacity to later on rise up and regain their former status in history. And I'm going to leave you with that. We live in the place where this example is imprinted into our head. Seattle is a city named after the tribal king, Chief Seattle. Great as he were, and they tell me he was a big man, just as big as me, 6 feet plus tall and powerful, and speaking like a true lord and a true king. And yet when the time came, he did not fight, and he signed a treaty, the Point Elliot Treaty, that promised them certain rights in the future, certain benefits. Within 1 year, the city of Seattle, they passed the Indian Expulsion Act. They burned down the houses of the Indians, the long houses of the chiefs and lords and princes and kings. And all the private houses, dwellings of Indians, they killed them, some of them burned alive, and they had to go away from their ancient motherlands. Why? Because they did not dare to fight. So keep that in mind every time everybody tells you the brave Indians or the great warriors or whatnot. Not in this neighborhood. They demonstrated quite well what happens to slave people who choose not to fight although they were lords in their own land. I don't know if any of you has any Indian blood in them, but me, through the benefit of my grandfather, Winston Churchill, his mother, Jenny Jerome, was almost half Indian, from the great tribe of the Iroquois people of upstate New York, the 7th band, the Seneca people. And now those, they were fighters. And they are not forgotten by history. And I think some of the wilderness in our hearts, in the heart of Winston Churchill, is attributed to the brave American Indian who chose to fight and die in the field of honor rather than discredit himself and his patria. So we have choices. There will be many difficult choices ahead, but do remember these examples as how you want to define our nation. You want to stick together and avoid civil war, even though the harpies, they will take you all the way to the brink, that you take out your gun and shoot your neighbor, or you're going to remain chilled, cool, and comfortable with the idea that you best save your munitions. There will be a real war that needs to be fought against real enemies later on. So I invite you to make a solemn promise here with me and raise your right hand and say, I shall never fire my weapons against my patriots, my brothers, my sisters, my citizens of these United States. And that's the only promise you can do right here. Please, don't be afraid. It's a good promise. Promise to keep our house in order. Promise to not have another repeat of the awful civil war that we experienced in the 1860s. You can make the promise privately into your own heart, but that is the only thing I demand of you as the price of admission in my circle of friends. Thank you very much. God bless you, and God bless America. Cheers.